I'm Tom Aiello. I'm a professor of history and Africana studies at Valdosta State University in Georgia. And uh, I came to know Kris through the University of Exeter, where we both studied anthrozoology. Kris, what about you?
Yeah,
Who are
so I've
you?
I've just I've just completed my PhD last year in Anthrozoology from the University of Exeter. My research actually focuses on cat-human relations and discourses surrounding roaming cats. But I have a general interest in how other animals are used as symbols and language. And yeah, so we organically started discussing before this paper, sort of some of our shared ideas. And yeah, we've collaborated on several projects since I started I think we both started the end of 2019, just before the COVID lockdowns, I believe.
Right. So we were kind of at the university together while a lot of the urban summer was going on in 2020 and a lot of those protests were happening. So we were in a space where the news was full of that and the school was full of animal stuff. And so it seemed like a um an easy comparison to kind of start thinking about how those two things worked together.
Yeah, it's such an interesting moment too, because the lockdown, a lot of people re-examine their relationship with their domesticated animals. Like you were talking, even I'm thinking about how many cats were adopted and also probably how many were released once the lockdown ended. I know a lot of shelters received a lot of pets back. I guess so. It's just interesting thinking about that too, of how much a lot of people realized how important their animals were in their lives in terms of companionship and things like that as well.
It's true. I mean, the lockdown itself was a whole different uh, had whole different consequences for animals than just the kind of protest movement that we're discussing here, both from individual adoptions and things like that to kind of the general understanding of memes. I know we talked a lot at the time about how there were all those memes about how the world is healing because humans were out and there are all these animals in spaces that normally did not have animals because humans had kind of abandoned them for a little while and things like that. So
Yeah. And so the focus of the article that I found you all through was that sort of even the use of the word animals. I know I struggled even naming this podcast of wanting to be clear that there isn't, I don't believe in this sort of hierarchy and we're all the animals as the guests and the host. But I
right.
think it's hard to even find the right word that doesn't enact a separation. Like I know creature is popular, or non-human animals. So I was just curious before we get into the article, how do you all relate to that word of animal?
I mean, I can answer that first. Yeah, I've been thinking, wow, there's been a lot of discussion sort of amongst our group about sort of the best term, and there is no there's really no consensus. I mean, I like to use animals, but in everyday language, people recognize that as being exclusive of as humans. So you sort of have to then emphasize all animals, including humans. And then there's issues with saying other animals or non-human animals. And then, so actually a term that I like is more than human animals, because it arguably it decentralizes the human, though of course the human is still in there. So, but this idea that animals are more than humans, so more than human animals. But yeah, you can really get buried in the language, and it usually just comes back to just saying human animals and non-human animals, because we're saying what we mean. Yeah.
It's a
The one
problem.
thing I do now in my papers, whenever I put humans, I put in brackets Homo sapiens. So humans are treated exactly the same as all other species. So I'm trying to make that a thing.
I like that. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
So I don't know
um,
what you think of animals, Tom. What your preferred
Oh, I vary back and forth. But I agree with both of you that I don't think there's a right answer to that question because language itself is centered in human centric ways. And so there's no way to kind of avoid some kind of conflict. I don't think there is a right term, but I think as long as you are in whatever you're saying, you are advocating for non-human animals, then I think whatever you end up using, your point gets across. I think that's what really matters. We have that a lot in historical studies of marginalized human groups. You know, hundreds of years ago, certain terms were considered respectable terms, and now they are considered insults. And that goes for a variety of groups, from racial groups, especially in the United States, but also gender and class related groups as well, where words come in and out of favor. And the difference, of course, is that when they're human groups, they kind of get to pick. You know, they get to say, this is what I feel comfortable with. And since we don't have that for animals, since they can't tell us what they would prefer, I think it matters less than the content of what's in front or behind of the words we use in those sentences.
Yeah. I think that's important, especially when you're trying to communicate to the audience ultimately is to change a mind or get people thinking. And so for anyone who isn't aware, the article that we're kind of centering the conversation on today, but obviously we'll go wherever, is the non-human animals as symbols in the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, which was out in Society and Animals. And I really appreciated the way that you were focusing on the specificity of language here and looking at both sides, how animals were used as symbols, both to speak to liberation or to point out the harm done, and then as well as to punish people who were protesting. So I was curious if we could just maybe unpack a couple of things from it, maybe starting with the Black Cowboys. I was really interested in that history and the way it was woven through, and those photos are kind of iconic as well. So how did you come upon that as part of this research?
Kris, what do you think?
um yeah, I'm actually trying to think how. I think originally we were thinking sort of as police horses were sort of the prominent and the sort of the negative reactions that they often created. And I think it was actually Tiamat who couldn't make it today. Really brought that to the forefront. And yeah, like you said, those images where they were all over social media and sort of in a more positive. They were used in a more positive context.
Yeah, I think there are two different ways to look at the Black Cowboys. The first is from a racial perspective, kind of the use of horses in that mold does take away the image of horses as policemen, which is normally what they are used for in those situations. And so it was an attempt to reclaim the kind of freedom and the American range and everything else that we kind of associate in this country with horses and bring them back to the other side, that they are not that horses themselves do not need to be associated with oppression or with regulation, that they are something else, especially in our mythology about how we've used horses and everything else. On the animal side, though, inevitably, you're putting those horses in harm's way and you're riding them in general, which for many, including myself, is a problem in and of itself. And so, you know, the horses there become an important symbolic effort in Black reclamation of dignity in the face of police brutality. For the horses, though, who aren't involved in any of those socially constructed norms, they are inevitably going to be exposed to tear gas. They are going to be exposed to large crowds of people. They are going to be exposed to concrete and urban settings where they are not habituated to be. And so it is an important effort by the Black Cowboys to kind of take back that image and to use it to fight against kind of oppression. At the same time, though, it's really not great for horses. And so while there are many kind of intersections of race and animality where both sides can benefit, the Black Cowboys wasn't really one of them. One side is clearly doing something that is incredibly valuable, but the other side, the horses, are not seeing any of that benefit.
Yeah. And that was sort of mirrored in the discussion of dogs as well. So historically, dogs have been used in a similar way in terms of being set out on liberation protesters in the past and used as, to track slaves and lots of violent things. But then also now that image of them, being in the protests and the kind of cutification, I guess, I don't know if that is a word I'm inventing of it, but yeah.
So yeah, I think so the horses are almost always a symbol of power, the sort of powerful symbol of riding upon a horse, and certain sort of it's a position of authority and power. And a similar thing does mirror with the dogs in that situation. Arguably, the police dogs are trained to deal with those situations. So I'm not saying that it's right, but they have had training to emotionally that they're better able to cope with that situation, where the concern for some of the companion dogs, the pet dogs that were brought along, it was a question of how well their guardians sort of really considered whether or not that they coped with crowds and how willing they were. Of course, a lot claim that their dogs were willingly coming along with them. How much they were in danger or not, it's sort of, we discussed that a little bit in the paper, and also the type of dogs and who is with the dog.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's the same phenomenon, isn't it? It's an attempt to reclaim dogs from the police. Because you're right. I mean, historically speaking, the racial relationship with dogs in the United States has not been great. I mean, dogs have been used in all kinds of vile ways, both for the dogs and for the Black population. And so using dogs with their cute little signs that say, "I bite racists" and "Black Lives Matter" and things like that is that same kind of thing. It is an attempt to say, look, our dogs support us. Our dogs are cuter than your dogs. Our dogs are friendly because we are the good guys and you are clearly the bad guys. Your dog growls. My dog has a cute little sign. And it is a kind of a symbolic way to say, you are the bad guy and I am the good guy. And that is all to the good, because that is the framing that is correct. But at the same time, again, the dogs aren't really getting a say here. And they too are going to be around gigantic crowds of people, often that are not. I mean, this is not like a peaceful march where we're going to kneel and pray at the Selma Bridge. I mean, this is a chaotic scene where in an urban environment, and dogs are necessarily going to kind of be put in harm's way in one way or another. And Kris, I think you're right. I mean, there is that other part of this, is that animals don't have the ability to give any specific consent to be part of this. I think that's a good point, that neither the horses nor the dogs are. I mean, they don't. All the stuff that we're arguing about in Black Lives Matter protests is all rooted in cultural constructs. It's all just stuff that humans have made up to be mean to other humans. Those animals don't have that because they don't see cultural constructs. Those are just things that we make up to blind ourselves. They have much better vision than we do. And so they're being kind of roped into something that isn't representative of their own frame of knowledge, which is actually probably far more accurate than our frame, because theirs isn't clouded with those constructs.
And I'm glad you brought up that idea of consent and choice, because that seems to be running underneath a lot of the critiques, is both the positive impact of them used as symbols, but also the irony of using a figure that doesn't have choice as a symbol for liberation as well.
True.
Great point.
It is a weird conflation. But in those moments, I think you're looking for the kinds of imagery that will get your message farther. And in a social media age, nothing is going to get that image farther than dogs and cats. So because that is what we look at every day on our phones.
Yeah. And it was mentioned just very briefly in the piece, but you talk about the narrative around pit bulls, right? And how formerly they were only connected to dog fighting and kind of like the thugification of African American men. And now there's been like a campaign to reshift that and actually see the dislike of pit bulls as a form of anti-Blackness. So I know that it wasn't like the main focus of the piece, but it was something that seemed as like a way that those kind of liberations can go hand in hand too, in that sense.
It's true. And that is, I think, important because when we think about police brutality, we tend to think about official violence against Black lives and bodies. But the reality is that police violence also happens against animals, especially pit bulls. The police, on average, shoot and kill more than one dog every day in acts of gun violence. The police statistically are more violent against dogs than they are against humans. And they are able to do so because since dogs are considered property under the law, any kind of killing of a dog is a search and seizure violation. It's not a life-taking violation. So they don't have any real consequence for doing it. And it turns out that when you parse the statistics for how the police brutalize dogs, they almost do so always against dog breeds that are historically or in the vicinity of Black neighborhoods. So they're committing acts of violence against animals specifically because they have kind of cubbyholed them as being part of the Black society. And so pit bulls get it a lot because they have been kind of tied to Blackness and inner city poverty in certain ways. And almost all the dogs that die in those shootouts die not because they're actually violent animals. Police will just walk up and shoot a dog, but they do it because they quote unquote feel threatened by a dog. And that is largely a creature not only of their fear of dogs, but of their fear of the kinds of neighborhoods that they are policing because those neighborhoods are minority majority.
Yeah. Kris, I know you think a lot about companion animals, and I know more specifically on cats, but in general, how do you feel pets or companion animals are an extension of the families they're part of?
Yeah, and I think this came up a bit in the paper, sort of regarding the safety of certain dogs over other dogs. And I think the golden retriever was one that sort of went viral. And this is a type of dog more associated with middle-class white families. And like Tom said, arguably that dog would be less likely to get targeted if the protests turned violent. But yeah, like Tom said, but perhaps bringing a pit bull like breed to those protests was more putting them in harm's way. I'm kind of repeating what Tom says here. So,
I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah,
I do.
but like Buddy.
It's interesting, there is a concept of flexible personhood that we refer to pets as a critique of pet keeping as flexible personhood. The reality is we do see those animals as part of our families. At the same time, though, even though there are more dogs that are killed by police than there are humans, we're not in the streets for that. And there's a reason for that, because there is this kind of flexible personhood wherein we do see these animals as part of our families until it becomes inconvenient or too expensive or something else. And I mean, we're not euthanizing grandma because she breaks her hip, and so Family is something that people like to tell themselves about their pets, but for the most part, most people, I think, don't actually class them in when push comes to shove because of the way that their end of life is treated and because of the fact that police brutality protests, they don't happen for the police brutality against animals. And so, I mean, I think that says a lot about how we view the family status and the flexible personhood of companion animals.
And you also discuss maybe for some companion animals, right? But for most, probably a food source, like the symbol of a pig, and animals that are already maybe at a lower status than our pets. So I was wondering if you could, back to that language piece, talk a little bit about the word pig and like the icon of the pig as synonymous with police.
I think that's your one, Tom.
Yeah, well, I mean
Yeah.
that goes back to the 19th century. We first start to see that use of pigs being associated with the police. At the same time that's going on, though, the white population in the United States is very much, and actually the scientific community, what today we would call the pseudo-scientific community, but at the time was considered legitimate science, was actively animalizing the Black population and referring to them as being closer to apes than to human beings. And so at the same time in the 19th century, we're getting racist people kind of arguing with scientific credentials that that the Black population was fundamentally less than, biologically less than white people. And then starting in England, but then moving over here, as police forces start to come around, we start to get police forces in the 1820s and 30s. That's when policing in urban areas becomes a thing. Before that, it had never really happened. It was more just justices of the peace and sheriffs and stuff. But as soon as we start doing that, lower class people and immigrants in particular, for whom the police were designed to control, start using the epithet pig to describe officers. And I think what's significant as that has evolved through the years is that obviously, all that phrenological eugenic science was totally wrong. And it makes no sense that the Black population was animalized and treated as a different species. Similarly, though, the police are referred to as pigs for traits that have nothing to do with actual pigs. And it is a demonstration not only as a prejudice against the police, which in most cases I'm actually okay with, but also a prejudice against pigs because they're ascribing these negative traits to pigs that simply don't exist. Pigs are not overtly violent. They do not attack for no reason. They do not essentially control the lives of other animals around them and force them into certain situations. That doesn't happen with pigs. And so it creates this negative stereotype of a pig. And even though there is no direct causal chain, I think it would be fair to say that it diminishes pigs in the eyes of most people because of that use as an epithet, and therefore makes it easier for people to kill and eat them without guilt. And even though we can't draw a specific causal chain there, I mean, I really do think that's part of it. And so animals get roped in as metaphors, and when they do, it diminishes them in our eyes, just the way that it did to the Black population in the 19th century when they became used as animal metaphors because they weren't fully human and because they were the missing link between chimpanzees and white people. And so everybody who gets put in that metaphor game ends up losing. And the animals who do are the one group in that scenario who can't push back, who can't make an argument against it because they're not included in the naming and in the game.
And a lot of, I mean, there's an efficiency to saying something like we're being treated like animals, right? In terms of evoking, oh, that's wrong, right? Or to make that distinction that we're just being treated as a different class. And but it's so embedded in the language. Sometimes I feel like it's hard to make it clear why that's a problem, right? Like the idea of a zoo shouldn't even be there to be compared to, right?
Right.
So it feels so, it's why I think your work is so important, that you're really looking at the nuances of that language. And I'm curious what you think could be a new way of making these metaphors or comparisons that maybe don't rely on animal images, if that's something that you can think of on the spot.
When we
Well,
accuse someone of behaving like an animal, what we really should be saying is you're behaving like a human.
no, I think
Um,
that's right. I think
that
we
may be.
reward good behavior by saying, you acted just like a pig. That's great. Maybe we
Yeah,
can just go the other way. I don't know.
That's true. Like you're as nice as a dog. um it's hard though.
It's hard because almost everybody is going to take that negatively no matter what. And, I don't think it's necessarily a problem because it's not like we're actually hurting the dog's feelings when we say those things because they don't understand. Language is just something we've made up. But at the same time, I think it's okay to use the animal metaphors as long as you point out that the treatment you're describing of animals is also bad. Like you can say they're treating us like animals as long as there is some kind of footnote that says, by the way, it's not okay to do that to animals either. We're just pointing out that it's similar. I think if you do that, I think there's less of a problem, maybe, but I don't think there's going to be a fix because they've been literally using animal metaphors in human language since the Babylonians. I mean, we're not getting rid of that anytime soon, unfortunately.
Kris, I would love to hear, do you have anything specific? I know that cats aren't in this piece really, but I'm just because you're here and I know that's your expertise. Are there certain ways people talk about cats that you either think are helpful or harmful, maybe a mix of both?
Yep, there's there's a lot of bad mouthing cats, and there are just people that just don't like cats. So yeah, can't think of anything specific now. But yeah, it's usually, well, I mean, cat is an insult. I'm trying to think, not really, other than the cat lady insult. It's generally you call somebody a cat lady, implying they have lots of cats, and so yeah, liking cats is a bad thing.
Maybe scaredy cat.
Yeah. What I don't know, we may want to cut this, but I'm just so one thing we started discussing at the beginning of this paper. It was during when the Black Lives protests were first in the news, and I'm in a lot of cat social media groups, partly for research, partly because I like looking at cat pictures. And there was a lot of this, or a little bit, I'd say a lot, but this comparison with black cats. So black cats, there's some evidence that they're less likely to be adopted, and there's sort of some evidence of prejudice against cats association, which is bad luck. So people started sort of putting things like Black Cat Lives Matter and sort of hijacking, and that felt really awkward and really wrong. And it was kind of demeaning the Black Lives Matter thing, and it brought out, I find it very uncomfortable because I find it hard to accept that people who love cats can also be a bit racist. It's like they love cats. How is that possible? So yeah, I felt very uncomfortable, and it sort of I don't really know where I'm going with this, but it was sort of, I guess that's the wrong way to sort of bring animals in as symbols to get a point across. So yeah, that's when I sort of first started thinking about animals as symbols, and that wasn't really relevant to the paper. It was something that's that's still sort of burning in the back of my mind a little bit, with how the negative side of comparing human human politics to not really similar things going on with animals. And there's a lot of problems that, and how we sort of use language to describe actions against humans and then applying that to other animals.
I feel like it's a communication issue too, of thinking like this is also bad, but you don't need to put it on top of something else. Like, how do you maybe create a different narrative? Yeah, that's disappointing to hear that happened. Yeah.
And I think that's a problem for animal activists in general, is how to sort of advocate for the other animals without demeaning human struggles and atrocities committed against humans.
Mm-hmm.
It's a problem. It really is, because for the vast majority of people who kind of fight for animal rights, they're talking about rights, which is a human concept, something that we've just made up. And so if you start from a position of humanism and work backwards, and you say the human and the animal, it often neglects the fact that human isn't just one thing. In the same way that there are a million different kind of animals in a million different situations, the human is also very different. For Black humans, it is, in the United States in particular, it is a completely different existence than it is for white humans. And so you can understand why some of them might resent those kinds of comparisons, because there isn't a one-to-one human and non-human. There's a bunch of these humans, some of whom have it a lot better than others, and then animals who have it all worse. But when we say human and non-human, we talk about human supremacy and those kinds of things. For minoritized groups, they don't feel that human supremacy. I mean, they don't see that because they're being abused within that category. And so when they see people kind of using their advocacy for another category entirely, they say, I think in a lot of correct ways and in some wrong ways, what about us? I mean, what about us? Aren't we just as or more important than animals? And when you hear that, you don't always agree with it, but you at least get it, why that might happen. Because I think one of the biggest things we can do is decenter humanism entirely, because that is where a lot of those contradictions come from.
That feels like a nice place to start wrapping up, but I'm curious, before we go, are there any projects or things that you're working on that you might want to share, or maybe just anything we didn't get to in our conversation?
Kris, what are you working on?
I have 4 papers in various stages under review. They are all cat-based papers, so this is work from my PhD. So yeah, my PhD is online now, but these are better versions of the chapters. So hopefully better versions of the
better versions. That's right. The new and improved. I'm working on a project about the Basilosaurus, which is an animal that lived 30 million years ago, not around anymore. But the American South used to be covered in water. And one of its inhabitants was this ancient carnivorous whale called the Basilosaurus. And it left bones everywhere. So all over the South, there are these giant Basilosaurus bones, and about how in the 19th century those bones were used to kind of create Southern identity. And hey, we're not just a bunch of rednecks. We have this science here, and they help contribute to the birth of paleontology, and it gets Southerners their universities and things like that. So the animal project I'm working on is about an animal who's not around anymore, but still has, evidences of him all around my region.
Wow, that sounds really interesting too. The ghosts of the animals past.
Yeah.